Good morning. My name's Stephen Mosley, and today we are here at the Hampton Inn and Suites in Barrie, Ontario, to have a review through the Healthcare Professions Appeal and Review Board that operates with the College of Physicians of Ontario. I have a review of my case against doctors violating a lymph node in my neck that should have been left alone, for causing a lot of stress and re-inflaming the very bad case of post-traumatic stress disorder, medical malpractice-induced post-traumatic stress disorder that I suffered from as a result of not being told that I had hepatitis C 17 years ago by two doctors who knew and failed in their professional duty to do so. So today, we're going to go through the dog and pony show. We're going to go through the three-ring circus. We're going to go through the pantomime, the charade, and the flyback facade of apparent justice in this bought and paid for colonial backwater. So I welcome you now to the Hampton Suites. This is my nephew, my favorite nephew, by the way, and he's covering it, and they're going to tell him to shut the camera off, of course, as soon as he gets to the door, but I've instructed him to keep it on until they tell him to shut it off. You ready to turn it off?
Yep. It's on.
Hi. Did you come out to get me and I wasn't there? Okay. All right, thanks.
Yep, go ahead on in.
Yeah. Is it facing?
Yep. Oops, sorry. Just go back here.
It's right there, I think. I don't think anybody's taken up that place.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Once you get comfortable, I can ask you to print and write your name in here and then pass to Ms. Martins and she'll sign in there.
Okay. Your name is Mr. Steele, is it?
It is.
Did you ever see that movie with Humphrey Bogart, In a Lonely Place, where he played Dick Steele, a writer?
That one I missed.
That was a good one. There's some really good lines in it.
Welcome to the Ontario Public Service Audio Conferencing System. Please enter your conference ID followed by pound.
Silver pen for a silver tongue.
Thank you. The moderator has not. Please enter your PIN followed. After the tone, please state your name followed by the pound sign.
Health board?
Thank you. You will now be placed into the conference.
So I just put my name in the attendee printed.
In London, ATSO. Hello?
Yes.
Hi.
Do we have
Hi
a,
there. It's Kristen London calling from
Anything
the
else
College of Physicians and
Is there
Surgeons.
anything else I fill out here?
Hi, this is Dina Awad, counsel to Doctors Clark and Mayne.
Good morning, Ms. Awad.
Good morning.
You good? You can sign if you like it.
Oh, I see. And
this
then
is Ty Lober from the health boards. We are just,
do I
just give
keep
us
the
a couple
second
of minutes
page with
prior
me,
to
or
starting
that's
the
for
review.
them?
Thank you.
Just leftover stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Here's a copy of all the information I'm bringing you here today. I only have one copy.
Just local.
first, actually, this is our complaint review from the health boards. Before we actually start, these are not hearings. This is a review for comments. We do not have recordings of these proceedings, so I would ask if you are recording that, we would not be.
Hello?
Hi there.
Oh, it's you, Bam Bam. And is Pebbles with you? Is she not with you?
No.
Aw, darn.
No, her mom's gonna be by the house in a bit, so.
Okay. Well, welcome. Welcome to my humble abode. It's Sunday afternoon. What is it? It would be the 25th.
Well,
Go ahead and take a look at some of those things up there. You can see that I used to bring people like Carlos Del Junco to town, the old folk thing. That's one of my pictures that hangs in someone's house, but it's way, way bigger. It's like about 20 times that size. And that's the first poster I used. And here's a shot of me at Cosmos there, trying out my guitar. Boy, I'd like to see that thing again. And then one of my fans gave me that, cut it out of the newspaper. And that's another picture that is about 20 times the size that hangs at the drug dealer's wife's. One of the loves of my life. She's no longer into drugs, neither am I, of course. 18 years clean and sober this past January. There's Mo Scarlett. I opened up twice for him. That's one of the pictures I'd like you to take a picture of there for me when we finally get my book together. And up here, that's another picture I'd like you to take a picture of to put in my book. And then over here, I have to hang my towel up, otherwise it'd get all moldy. There's a poster of what happened there a few years ago when two members of the same secret society ran for president. Amazing, eh? Their loyalty is to the secret society. And here's my wall of fame. I don't know how close in you can get on any of this. Mostly it's me. And then the Garth Hudson show I went to see at the McLaren Art Gallery. Only 35 people showed up to see Garth Hudson, who played in one of the most famous rock and roll bands of history, right? In all-time history, right? Right up there with the Beatles and Rolling Stones. 35 people from Rumorville show up, right? So there, you can see that on that poster there that I have played. My name's right there, Mo Stevenson. And played on the same bill with people like Downchild and Emery Lester and guys like that there. And then back here is my, I guess I call this my mud room. It used to be my bedroom, but it's too small. So there's some pictures, there's some CDs that I did. There's my last CD right here that I still have quite a few copies left of. And here's a picture of Mississauga North, otherwise known as Barrie. That's me when I was like, I don't know, 2, I think. There's my little cat coming through the weeds, old George. And here I am there with my 2 local supporters there, protesting the war in Iraq. The most recent war in Iraq. The first one there, I actually threw a brick through the windows of the Conservative Party headquarters to protest our country's involvement. And I got away with it until a friend of mine ratted on me. And I paid for the window and did about 4 days in jail. In today's climate, of course, I'd be considered a terrorist and locked up for quite a while, probably tortured as well. So, and this is sort of my tribute to Henri Magritte in my own way. And this is Dazed of the Dog. And here's my washroom here. Here's my washroom. Now this is where all the action takes place. That's how I get to make myself look so handsome. There's my chair now, you see. As a result of this here thing, we don't know whether it was the trans fats in the margarine I was eating, or the cheese, or the stress I was undergoing with my second case against the College of Physicians and the doctors involved in 18 years. So now I'm strapped into a leg brace that I'll probably have to wear for the rest of my life. And I use a cane. I have a cane right here. This is my cane for the winter, for the better weather. And these are some of my leg braces here that I have to wear. This is the clunky one that they made for me. I only wear that when I'm shoveling the snow. And this is my leisurely for around the house brace. It's quite nice and compact. This baby here though, this one here, this is the cutting edge of braces. I can almost, I can live a fairly normal life. If not, my foot would hang like this all the time, drop foot, and I'd drag it, and I wouldn't be able to walk at all. So, and this is as far as I can lift my left hand up from a stroke. And I can't play guitar. Want to hear a few chords?
Mm-hmm.
This is how well I can play the guitar now. They were playing me in places like Uruguay and Finland, and on the CBC every now and then. But I won't spend too long on this because it's a little bit too heartbreaking. When I return to drawing, I'm going to do a drawing of a guitar on the stove, on the back burner of a stove in flames. That's all I'm going to play you. And I'll probably never play again. I know that might have sounded fancy to some people out there, but I was a little twinklier than that before I had my stroke. In fact, maybe for some background music, we'll just turn this on. What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
You can take pictures of some of the movies I watch, Bit of a political animal. There's me playing by the bookstore when I first started out. There's the backyard that I turned into a beautiful place to sit and have tea and look out at the lake. And this is where I hope to be coming from today. I hope to be coming from that place right there, within my temple. And, oh yes, will I pick that up in the background of the music? Yeah. Just thought we might as well look at this here. A sneak shot of the probably 300 harps that are in that thing. So, it's probably not going to get full anymore because I'll never play again. But what else? Oh, here's my Muslim prayer mat that I don't use. I still consider myself a Muslim, but I'm more like a deist, a monotheist. I use the Lord's Prayer in my prayers. I believe that Orthodox Jews, Christians, and Muslims are all part of one book. And that book consists of the Torah, the Gospels, and the Quran. There's my degree in addictions. I tried to do a little too much, I guess, you know. There's me coming in second at the Victoria, BC Talent Festival years ago. There's my old Donald Duck car. So I think that's there's one of my idols there. Another one of my idols over here used to drive that old fire truck. My grandpa. My grandpa loved me with unconditional love. There's my map of the rich world, poor world. It shows you how the first world sucks the crap out of the third world and then just kind of turns the other way and pretends they don't know. And a lot of them actually don't know, because until you've been through something like I've been through, you too will think that everything's just stay okay. And we live in a democracy. But when in actual fact, we don't live in a democracy at all. We live in a plutocracy. Democracy is really only another 9-letter world, much like oligarchy. And if you ain't got that do-re-mi, you ain't got deadly piss crap, my friends. If your last name is Mulroney, Trudeau, or Black, or Chrétien, you can buy all the democracy you want in this bought and paid for trough Muslim colonial backwater. So basically today, I guess I'll provide you with a seat over here, sir, where you can get a better view of me. Here's my, you helped me set that up. That used to be my setup when I played in the street, when I peddled my musical ass for spare change, because people would rather hear tie a yellow ribbon around the old oak tree or Moon River over and over and over again, night after night after night. There's a guy trying to sing original tunes. What the hell are you talking about? We don't want to hear that. We want to hear the piano man. We want Johnny Cash or, Ring of Fire. Come on, what's Rolling Stone? Leonard Skinner. Don't you know Leonard Skinner? What the hell's wrong with him? Well, here's this magazine here I got from my social worker to read up on. Very interesting story. Very interesting man. Happens a lot in this world. Way more than the news reports about it. The same as the news very rarely reports that there's a beheading happens in Mexico every goddamn day. But that never makes it to the mainstream media in this country, because when they went from house to house in Boston to get the Sarnoff brothers, they removed and confiscated every gun in every household that they went through and illegally searched. Then they sanded off the serial numbers on those guns, and through the Project Fast and Furious, they delivered them to the Mexican drug cartels. So now that the police in Mexico can't do anything about the strong drug cartel problem down there, vigilantes are now taking justice into their own hands. And that's what really has to happen in a country before people really take action. As long as the gas is on, the internet's on, the TV's on, everybody's comfortable, and they haven't been unjustly treated in any way, they're oblivious. But if you take a country like Bolivia, where Bechtel Corporation pretty well owned everything in the country, to the point where they finally said, we won't even allow you to collect rainwater from your houses anymore. You got to pay for that too. That's when the people finally lost it. And unfortunately, that's what has to happen in this world. As long as we're comfortable, we will just sit there, and we'll take it up the butt. Now, is that too loud? Should I turn it down a bit?
Yeah, maybe a bit.
That was off my first CD. I did 5 of them. I was ready to do 2 more at the time of my stroke. Now, the investigation took 1.5 years. And basically, this is about an ineffectual system that provides absolutely no resolution for the victim. So, in In Toronto, they have this building down on College Street called the College of Physicians and Surgeons. And basically, it's a great big concrete and brick block that supports a lot of university graduates and makes sure they're well paid to go through token investigation after investigation. And in the end, come back with letters that say, after your investigation and reading your letters to the College of Physicians, we've decided to take no further action. So, unless you can get 10 women together that have had 10 of the wrong breasts lopped off, or some doctor that's been playing with little girls or something in the back room, unless you can launch a class action suit and get a lawyer to take your case pro bono, you're shit out of luck. In this country, you have to commit a crime to qualify for legal aid. And otherwise, like I said, if you ain't got the honey, baby, you've got nothing. And they'll just play you the way a cat plays with a mouse, and they'll put you on that hamster wheel, and they'll run you ragged until you finally go, Jesus Christ, I'm giving up before I lose my mind. So that's sort of in a nutshell what it's about, and I'll probably repeat myself a couple of times in this speech of mine. This is what I read in the hearing. I want to mention one thing, though, before we get into this. I'll turn that down just a touch more, or is it okay there?
Maybe a touch more.
A bit more. How's that?
Yep.
Okay. That's the Rubber Boot Man song. Anyway, what was I going to say? Oh, yeah. In the Robin Hood film with Russell Crowe, in the film, growing my hair long, getting good at the back. Russell Crowe is approached by the king, and he said, "Weren't you impressed with my crusade?" They'd gotten back from the Crusades, and this was England after the Crusades. And he said, "No, I wasn't, in fact. But I do remember the look on a young Muslim girl's face whose head you were about to behead, and she was looking at you with the most profound sense of pity. I'll never forget that look," he said. And then he killed her because she was looking at him with pity because she knew he'd already damned his soul to hell. So, personally, I think this is hell, but I don't believe that there is a hell. But if you take, for instance, the great white shark, it's one of the only animals on the planet that refuses to live in captivity. It will bang itself against the walls of its aquarium, and it will stop eating, and it will just roll over and die. Rats, too, if they're put in a cage and given the choice to press on levers, if they press on one lever, they get more food faster, but the rat in the adjoining cage who has electrodes attached to it will be shocked. If they press on the other lever, they'll get less food slower, but their brother rat will not get shocked. So, in the test that was performed at Atlanta University, I believe, some time ago, the rats all chose to let their brother rat off in the cage, and they settled for less food slower, rather than hurt their brother rat. So, personally, I think that we humans could learn a few things about rats, from rats, and sharks. You know, I mean, I'm a whistleblower, okay? I'm what's called a whistleblower. Here's my little buddy rat here. I'm basically, to some people, especially the ones that are committing the crimes, I'm considered a rat. But actually, I'm a truth seeker, and I believe it's my responsibility as a good Canadian, whenever I see wrong committed anywhere, to report that wrong to the authorities or to my member of parliament. And I tell you, you can go from the Prime Minister on down, and they'll all just pass the buck on you, and they will drive you insane because not one of them gives a shit about anything. And I remember when I was campaigning for compensation for the victims of tainted blood, and I ran into this young man who was, I guess he was about 12 years old. He was riding his bike across the country to try and raise awareness for people for the victims of tainted blood. And he was a hemophiliac. so he wasn't a drug user at all. So basically, the country had a huge storehouse, Connaught Laboratories, who Paul Martin was head of at the time, but we'll never know because all those records were shredded, and the doctor who shredded them is now suing the government for defamation of character. And all I got to say about that is, what character? But they had this warehouse full of blood, and half the blood was cryogenetically treated, so it was therefore safe to put on the street. The other half hadn't been treated, but they decided to risk it. And so a whole bunch of innocent people ended up with hepatitis C and AIDS and died. Some of them were compensated, some of them weren't. When I came along in 1997 with my case was about possibly thousands of people. Given that I'd done an information seminar on the disease, and 10 out of the 30 people that showed up to hear me speak also hadn't been told, that's one hell of a lot of souls, to use a worn-out cliche, like if you do the math, for instance. From St. John to Victoria, that's a lot of souls. And that was my first run-in with the college, and that's when I first began to develop what I like to call medical malpractice-induced post-traumatic stress disorder. So I'm going to turn this right off now so that I can concentrate. Now, I don't have a microwave, but they can now actually tune into some chip in your microwave and turn it into a microphone, and they could be listening to every word we're saying right now. In fact, it could be a drone hovering above us outside, taping this whole conversation, and people say that's really good because, we got to get those terrorists. Meanwhile, they're supplying ISIS. And that's why the gas prices are so low right now, because they're trying to cripple Russia, because they want to be the world's only superpower. So anyway, they're doing their damnedest to try and get World War III off the ground, in my opinion. And it's precisely because of stuff like this. And until we live in a true democracy, I will say this again in this, but I have to harp on it because a good preacher, a good pastor, a good imam will do that. The main message for me as a whistleblower is this, that basically that building in Toronto called the College of Physicians and Surgeons does nothing more really than provide huge paychecks for people that went through university to collect. And then they go to these token meetings, hearings, and that's where I was trying to relate it to that woman who, the Muslim girl that was about to be beheaded by the king, and her looking at him with profoundest sense of pity because she knew that he damned his soul to hell. When I looked at those people at the hearing, I was also filled with sort of a sense of pity, and I thought to myself, you go to hearing after hearing after hearing after hearing, you watch people cry and break down, you hear their stories, and then you pack up and you leave and you go to the next hearing, and there's no resolution happening, and yet you somehow are able to justify your paycheck. But everything is so tight today. The money is so tight, even for rich people. Just because you live in a higher bracket doesn't mean that you can afford to downgrade or... Anyway, we're all basically kind of forced to look the other way and just pretend it's not happening because we don't want to lose our retirement packages and the things that we fought hard to get. And that's not the Canada I grew up in. The Canada I grew up in, you could go anywhere in this country and get a job anytime. Members of the CBC, I remember watching this one program where this fellow was working for Indian Affairs and Aboriginal Affairs, of course, and he found the people living in poverty-stricken conditions without plumbing and everything else, so he started taking some of the funds that he was getting and providing those people with toilets and running water and all that kind of stuff. Then he got caught and he got fired. This is back in the old days when CBC was black and white. And they asked him, if you had the chance to do it all over again, would you do it? And he said, I would. And you don't find a lot of people like that anymore. And we don't live in a climate where, when I was growing up and I worked at the hospital as an orderly, I could 1 week's pay would pay for my apartment for the month, and so the other 3 weeks' pay that I get that month could go towards buying a new car, saving up to get married. But now we're all so tight because the rent's so high, the wages are so low, the price on everything's so high. And that's how Big Brother wants it, so that he can manufacture consent for his phony wars, and so that he can keep control over us all and keep us begging for, keep us down and completely obliterate the middle class. You know, the new middle class are made up of well-paid police officers, teachers, nurses, and firemen. The old middle class is now the lower class, and then just below them are the permanently poverty-stricken like myself. And the top 1% owns well over half of the wealth in the world. So anyway, I will begin with my address to the medically bought and paid for. First of all, before I throw myself right into the meat of this monster, I must state for the record that even before I proceed with my side of the story, otherwise known as the correct version of these malicious and tragic events, that I already know what the outcome will be, and word for word what will be written to me after all is said and done. And so, might I add, to each and every one of you. This is what I read to the people at the hearing that day. I will check the mail in a couple of weeks, and I will receive a letter that will say, after the hearing of November 4th, and after reviewing your letters to the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario, the board has decided to take no further action. So that's just a hunch. We'll see if that turns out to be true. How do I know this? Why, because I've already been through these diabolically calculated maneuvers by a system that refuses to even hint at its deliberate, premeditated ineffectuality 17 years ago in the case of Stevenson's versus Doctors Blah Blah and Bling Bling, and Stevenson versus Dr. Schwing. Two cases that I was forced to give up because I began to develop a severe case of what I like to refer to as medical malpractice-induced post-traumatic stress disorder. This condition can manifest itself when a totally innocent and severely maligned citizen who's been malpracticed to the point of near provable and certain death attempts naively to try and find real democracy and resolution, only to find out that everyone in this bought and paid for colonial backwater and bum boy for the New World Order, from the Prime Minister's office on down, don't give a rat's other end unless, of course, your last name is Mulroney, Martin, Chrétien, Harper, Black, Rogers, or O'Leary, or even Morgentaler, i.e., if you ain't got that do-re-mi, boys, and you ain't got what it takes to buy the only justice that's available in the true north, strong and free. Because you see, when one is played with the way a cat plays with a mouse and is forced to run a treadmill that leads to nowhere like a pet hamster, one can begin to lose their grip on reality, much like those prisoners in Guantanamo Bay, arrested on speculation without charges and tortured beyond belief. My torture was much less, but nonetheless psychologically crippling, to the point where I had to go on disability because I could no longer work, and to the degree where I now question every decision a physician would even suggest. And you would too, also, as well as furthermore besides and likewise. If you were told that you had hepatitis C by two physicians who knew long before you found out, and only after your skin turned yellow and your stool turned white as a dog's feces in the spring, as a matter of fact. And on top of that, I was also poisoned by the number one corporate offender at the time, Hoffman La Roche Pharmaceuticals, whose headquarters are strategically located in Switzerland because they also manufacture the Rohypnol, the date rape drug, which is sold legally in Mexico and Brazil. And so all these women that get raped, they can't sue. They told me they were going to give me a placebo. I was given halfway through the treatment. I was put on just to shut me up. And the doctor sure knew wouldn't work, even though Revitron was already in existence. You can leave that in, by the way. I really don't care what that guy thinks. Called me up yonder. Yet again, eventually, after traveling as far away as Hamilton, I was able to obtain Pegatron 5 years after my ordeal with this smoke and mirrored institution, and that eventually cleared the virus from my system. though murderers in the Kingston pen, who I had advocated on behalf of, received it 5 years before I did. Nice, eh? I'm out here fighting for my life with everything I've got, and killers got it before I did. Makes you feel safe, doesn't it? Like when those psychiatrists released that fellow who cut someone's head off on a bus out west a few years back. Oh, Canada, duh, our home that we stole from the natives' land. You see, ladies and gentlemen, of the spot and paid for trough nuzzling herd, I presented an information seminar on this disease at a local church here, only to find out that no less than 10 of the 30 people who showed up to hear me speak that night had also not been told by the physicians. I told you I'd repeat myself. Not to mention all the men I was bumping into at local AA meetings who had also been held captive in the same Salvation Army drug and alcohol treatment program I attended at Hope Acres in Glencairn, Ontario in 1996, and where Dr. Blah Blah worked, and who had also not been informed of their condition. So if you'll pardon the use of a worn-out cliche, if you do the math, if that was the case here, in this little corner of the empire, extend those percentages from St. John's to Victoria, BC, and that's one hell of a lot of souls put at risk. Mesdames et messieurs, is it not? And imagine if it were AIDS, ladies and gentlemen. You who only pretend to stand on guard for thee, what a hue and cry there would have been, led by the hijacked Rainbow Club in this heterosexually challenged nation of duped slaves and politically blind and comfortably complacent myophians. My story would have been well known to you all a long time ago. I would have had a legal representative at my side willing to drag these pretenders through the muck they most certainly deserve. But of course they didn't even have to attend today, did they? That's right, the doctors at the hearing where I read the speech at didn't even have to attend. They also got paid for the operations they performed that they failed with on my lymph node. So they didn't have to attend, they didn't miss a day's pay, didn't miss a wink of sleep, and they certainly didn't have a stroke. Why? Because this pseudo-democracy caters to the elite and those whose titles and professions put them above the law. Too big to fail. It's not just for bankers, my friends. There's a whole other class of people that falls into the same category. The Gift of Death, Confronting Canada's Tainted Blood Tragedy by Andrew Picard is a book that I have read and that I would highly recommend to any of you who might choose to blow the whistle on colleagues of yours in the future, some of whom might be sitting here in this very room right now, as it tells it like it really was and how it obviously still is after all these years. In fact, I would even go as far as to say that if you haven't read it, you probably never will, and you therefore most certainly should not even be in this room with me today. And if things really have changed, then why are we here today? Why are we even here today? And bothering to dance through this charade, pantomime, illusion, and 5-act facade of apparent justice. It will be 2 years this coming March since I began my case, and here we are in this desert of the soul, seeking a new and fresh water that never even existed in the first place, and was only a mirage to mislead thirsty souls such as I, in search of justice, that really only ever existed on paper, and most definitely not in reality. I had 7 letters of support for my former case, one from the head of the Hepatitis C Society of Canada, all saying that after, one from a doctor, two psychiatrists, one from an addiction doctor, a gastroenterologist, a Catholic priest, and the head of the Hepatitis C Society, all saying that after reading Mr. Stevenson's letters from the college, we believe he should have his day in court. But one has to commit a crime in this lullaby asleep at the wheel land to even qualify for legal representation. And none of the lawyers I went to see if they take on my case pro bono all bowed out because, number one, they were afraid to go up against the $4 billion trust fund doctors have to draw upon for legal representation, so they don't even have to pay for their lawyers. And two, they refused to believe that the Salvation Army could even be capable of such a thing, even though, just like the Vatican, the Army is exempt from revealing their cooked books to anyone. And did you know, coincidentally, that over 2/3 of all Salvation Army personnel are made up of ex-cops and military officers? Check it out. And of course, there's always the old credibility card. The apologists and cowards can drag out as a last resort like they use when a prostitute gets raped, and say things like, but she asked for it, didn't she? Or as in my case, you gave this to yourself, didn't you, sir? Which in both cases, along with the former habits I was a slave to, was never the issue. It was not until some years later that I realized that I would have had an open and shut case at the Hepatitis C Society only allowed me to do a story on my intended class action suit in their monthly newsletter, because literally thousands would have signed on. But Jeremy Beattie, their founder, and who I was in constant contact with throughout, was unavailable due to a liver transplant he was undergoing at the time. And I believe to this day, given the millions the Canadian government had doled out after tainted blood, that the Hep C Society had been infiltrated by government moles to ensure that no class action suits would make it through their deliberately contrived maze. Because out of all the 7 letters of support, theirs was the most convoluted, and it took them a full page to say what the others said in 4 or 5 lines. And even then, it was so indirect as to make one wonder just what they were attempting to get at. And I also made the mistake of trusting Dr. Bling Bling of Toronto General when he told me that he would analyze what remained of the 2 empties and the 2 fullies that almost took my life again during that smoke and mirrored so-called treatment I was put on, that again nearly killed me, and some of which were supposed to be placebos, and which I, like a complete fool, handed over to him in good faith, even though 2 physicians had already betrayed me. But you try writing 30-page letters to everyone from the Prime Minister's office on down, and to people who are supposed to give a damn, and putting together 200, 300, and 400-page rants full of enough documentation to sue them all, only to have them fall on the deaf ears of bought and paid for demons and trolls who care more about their fat lives and obese pensions than they do for anything that even resembles justice. And see if you don't, shall we say, begin to lose it a bit. And I never did receive the analysis of those results because I'd given up after 5 years of the cruel and bottomless nothingness I was put through, though I have saved all the information in 2 blue boxes full of enough evidence I had, and it just didn't seem to matter. Now, no matter how hard I tried or how articulate I was, to even the Fifth Estate or W5, it will never matter to anyone, just like the fake and posed motions we are going through here today. So now that this is off my chest and the ground has been prepared for my position in today's case, let us begin with these new facts, shall we? The time was March 2013. But first I must say, have you noticed how I often stray from the issue at hand? You see, that's what PTSD does to you when you relive the terror of it all. But I assure you that you will eventually begin to see how it all connects once I've given you the full picture, which in my mind is not only necessary, but my right so to do. So you see, in the 8 years after clearing the hepatitis C virus, thanks to the Pegatron, I was finally able to obtain from a doctor who was finally willing to take a chance on me. I accomplished a lot, but before I go into what I accomplished, I must first mention that Dr. Bling Bling would tell each new gastroenterologist I went to see not to put me on the treatment because I had a real bad reaction to his treatment. But interferon doesn't cause a case of dry heaves for 3 whole days or raise your liver enzyme levels to verging on 1,000. 200 is considered extremely severe, by the way. So am I to believe that some half-witted pharmacist at Toronto General Hospital simply gave me the wrong medication? But those bottle caps that month were a different color, and by the time I'd injected into me what I thought was only a placebo, I was sicker than I've ever been in my entire life. And let's not forget that neither the college or he ever provided me with those analysis results. Those bottles I unwittingly gave to him in trust. So was I or was I not deliberately poisoned by Hoffman-La in collusion with Dr. Bling Bling and the Hep C Society so that no more monies would be paid out by our corporate fascist government? I mean, the records from tainted blood were all shredded that would have implicated people like Paul Martin, the head of Connaught Laboratories at the time, who were affiliated with the Red Cross, along with a host of other culprits. No one was ever charged with one single crime, and the worst crime against humanity ever perpetuated on the people by their own government. And now, just like Mulroney did, the doctor who shredded the evidence is suing our government for defamation of character. Again, what character, ladies and gentlemen, I ask you? Yet again, what blinking character? The man should be banned from ever practicing medicine again, and should be doing hard time right next to those prisoners I advocated on behalf of. Please forgive my life in the food chain method of explaining my position, i.e. the little bug gets eaten by the big bug, the bigger bug gets swallowed by the frog, the bird devours the frog, the man eats the bird and dies of the bird flu, a disease that was probably manufactured in some lab, just like the ones Hoffman and Ross used to manufacture Rohypnol, the date rape drug, sold legally in Mexico and Brazil, by the way, and by well-meaning men and women who were just doing what they were told, just like you here are doing today. See, we have to keep remembering that this is the speech I read at the hearing at the hotel. They all came up from Toronto. We're in Barrie, Ontario, by the way. But that's what PTSD does to a soul. I feel driven and compelled to go over as many of the angles as I can, because I have been violated, betrayed, and deliberately deceived by people who should know better, but who have chosen instead to protect their positions and the noble lie. That's from People's Republic, again, by the way, that would keep the herd deaf and dumb and keep all the money and power in their well-greased palms. Now back to March 2013. I will be clean and sober 18 years to the day of this coming January, so that would have been about 25 days ago. And that number would be 23 years if I'd only been told about my liver disease when it was first known. You see, some recovering drug addicts and alcoholics feel driven to try to make up for the time they lost, trying to stay numb to the things like their mother's postpartum psychosis, their father's penchant for violence, the abortion their fiancé had, and a whole slew of other ghosts in the closets of their lonely, alienated lives. So during and after the cure, i.e. Pegatron treatment, I set out to repay all the monies my father ever lent me and exceed against the odds that were lined up against me. And in spite of how I'd been pegged, slotted, and cruelly shunned by virtually everyone I've ever known or loved. I'm a poet, an artist, and a folk singer-songwriter, and I decided that if the system was going to try to take me down, then I would at least go down with my boots on like the good little cowboy I am. In this case, my boots being my guitar. So I started busking to make extra money and doing gardening and odd jobs on the side. It wasn't easy, but in 8 years I paid my debt to my father. Did 5 CDs in 4 years, all of which made it into the CBC's Digital Library of Song, and graduated with honors in addictions. I've opened for Kim Mitchell, Mo Scarlett twice. I shared the bill with Lynn Miles, Emery Lester, and the Downchild Blues Band. My dream was to get off disability and carve a career in the music business, and to prove every last one of those doubters who'd ever dared to question my abilities dead wrong. I wasn't after fame, only the respect that a good carpenter or plumber gets after years in the business and a chance to find regular work in the field I love the most, and that had somehow chosen me. As I was saying earlier, my music was getting played as far away as Finland and Uruguay for some strange reason, and Canada occasionally. But my timing was off. The kind of music, though loved by complete strangers, was too old and out of style. I felt like Rip Van Winkle awakening from a long sleep, only to find out too late that everything had changed. And my email tag isn't hamletvango@gmail.com for no reason. I identified with tragic characters from both art and literature, and my art was anger-driven, just in case you haven't noticed yet, due to the stress that medical malpractice-induced post-traumatic shock I still and will probably always suffer from. You see, if you are raped by the football team, for instance, you may learn how to manage what is left of your pathetic and shaken to the core life, but those scars don't ever go away, and that is why we are here today. I managed to secure a luncheon date with Bill Garrett, formerly of the CBC, now of Borealis Records. Not one, but 2 Decembers in a row, hoping to get signed to his label. That's not how things turned out. And so even though I dreaded another winter playing on the side of the curb, I dragged my sorry ass out there, driven by poverty, because I quite simply needed the extra cash. And that, my medically bought and paid for friends, is where our story will finally begin. So it took me a while to get through all that, and I talked too fast and kind of jumbled up my story, but I'll try and speak slower now. This particular year, I wound up with an infected lymph node, so that would have been 2 Marches ago, 2/13, right? Yeah. With an infected lymph node the size of half a lemon, just below my chin on the left side of my neck. So after about a week, I went to see Dr. Bling Bling, but after seeing his assistant, because he was apparently on holidays, or did Dr. Bling Bling just not want to see me and give his new sidekick some experience? Does anyone really know? And would anybody really tell if they really did know? Anyway, after I persuaded him to, this gentleman gave me a low dose of some type of inexpensive welfare antibiotic to take to see if the half a lemon size swelling would go down. A week later, I returned and pleaded with him for more, as it was still the same size. Against his professional opinion, this man gave me another week's worth of the same ineffectual antibiotic. Another week passed. The swelling had not retreated a bit, and I again pleaded with him for either some more of the same or something else that might work. And I must remind you that all through this period, I was still playing on the street, and this was in late February, early March. He then said he would send me for an ultrasound, and then he probably couldn't get me an appointment until the first week in April, and this was around March the 20th. The lump was still the same size, half a lemon, and nothing he'd prescribed had worked, so I emphatically insisted that this was not suitable, and that I needed to see someone ASAP. So he advised me to phone Central Intake, and I got an appointment, the appointment I needed, and was entitled to the following day, which so happened to be a Friday. During the procedure the following morning, the technician pressed firmly on the swollen area in order to get a clear image of the node. I thanked her and returned home, but upon arriving home, I noticed that the swelling had gone down considerably and that I was feeling ill. You see, I believe that the pressure she applied pushed the poison out of the node and into my lungs, which is what caused the full-blown case of pneumonia I would be suffering from when I went to emerge and fell into the careless and malicious hands of Dr. Schwing that following Monday morning. Now, every doctor I've mentioned this to all deny that the pressure applied by the technician couldn't possibly have pushed the poison into my lungs, but I think I know my own body, and if any of you here today were truly honest, you'd agree with me. But it's all about denial, isn't it? Wear the poor soul down until he gives up. Something Miss Bling Bling has been attempting to do. That's the person who managed my case through the college physician. Has been attempting to do since day one. You see, back in the shady 80s, during my drugged-out drinking days, I developed an abscess tooth that got pulled too early and became infected. I woke up one morning to find a golf ball-sized lump in my armpit. So I pressed hard on it and it eventually went away. The following morning, I awoke to find another golf ball-sized lump under my bottom lip on my chin. So I did the same thing and pressed on it, and it vanished. On the third morning, I woke up and found a huge mushroom-sized bulge protruding from the extrusion hole in my mouth where the tooth had been extracted. So I stuck it with a pin, and the ugliest pus I'd ever seen came gushing out of that cave. Now again, every doctor I've ever mentioned this to claims that this was probably just another coincidence, even though tooth infections are the major cause of death in the third world where antibiotics aren't even available. None were prescribed to me, by the way. And again, I know my own body. So all those phony deniers and apologists for the medical pretension out there can go straight to hell. No pass and go. You can give me $200 or to someone who needs it. Now, where were we? Oh, yes. On that Monday morning, I arrived at Royal Victoria Hospital here in Barrie at 8 a.m. to see a professional who might know a thing or two. However, I made the mistake of saying that I no longer trusted my physician's judgment, and I went into great detail about my previous ordeal of 17 years ago, about not being told I had liver disease, and almost dying no less than 4 times as a result, and the medical malpractice-induced PTSD, etc. So postures were taken, blood tests were feigned, and after coughing and shivering on the stretcher, Dr. Boo Boo returned. Didn't even put a stethoscope to my mucus-filled lungs and said that I could just go home if there was nothing wrong with me. Now, I'm a pretty good judge of character and body language, and though I will never be able to prove it, I believe Dr. Boo Boo simply took a dislike to me, and might have even thought, so you've got a problem with the medical profession, eh? Well, I'll show you. So sensing this, I became extremely agitated as the PTSD flags were now flapping wildly in the wind between my ears. Notice my metaphor here, folks. It would be pretty funny, wouldn't it, if only it wasn't true. So I told everybody on the floor that they hadn't done their jobs, and not one of them knew a goddamn thing about PTSD. Dr. Boo Boo then threatened to call security and said, don't bother. And I said, don't bother. I will just leave. Just give me the name and number of your superior, which he did. I called sometime later, which was yet another total waste of time. So I go home with a major case of the chills and splits. Is there anybody out there aware that you can actually die of pneumonia? Believe it or not. And I pissed and saw my sheets that night. I get up the next morning and demand to see my doctor. When I see him, I beg for a better and stronger antibiotic. He gives me his prescription. Now remember, I've got full-blown pneumonia. I'm traveling all over town, doing all of this by myself. Imagine if you didn't have a vehicle. If I didn't have a vehicle, I'd be dead. And you'd all be messing with some other poor sucker's head and trying to wear him down the way you've tried to do to me. A week passes and my lungs are still full of mucus, so I go and request some more. Now, had Dr. Boo Boo simply welcomed me into the hospital and simply done his job, none of this would ever have happened. And let's not forget that he observed my lymph node to be approximately 2 centimeters in size when I saw him in emergency. Because this was after the ultrasound, and she pressed the poison into my lungs, so it had gone from the size of a half lemon to the size of a pea. Because this is a very important point. In fact, everything I'm saying here today is of the utmost importance, because just like Martin Luther King once said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And you folks seated here today had better well let this sink in, if we're ever going to be able to establish a true and equal democracy for all. But if you are just here to get paid, as I suspect many of you are, then just keep on ignoring me and all the other citizens who will crawl past your chilling gaze on your way to a big fat retirement package that will be waiting for you, unless and or until people finally wake up and rise up en masse and show you just how wrong you really are. So another week passes and my lungs are still full of mucus, though my condition is improving somewhat. So I obtain another week's worth full of antibiotics. Another week's worth of antibiotics. But by now, I'm wondering if I have lymphoma or cancer. So I may get another mistake, because that's just what naive and innocent people do, and I request a possible biopsy on the node, even though it's gone from the size of half a lemon down to the size of a walnut, and now it's down to the size of a pea. So Dr. Padoop, who has returned from his holidays, I presume, sets me up to see Dr. Schwingerschwanger. The following week, and this is where my story becomes absolutely unfathomably and insidiously evil. Word I'm sure most of you liberally minded keepers of the public trust out there will feel extremely uncomfortable with, and that is precisely why I shall wield it and let these blows to your collective psychic jugular veins fall where they may, as I could care even less about them than you obviously do about me. I then requested another week's treatment of the same antibiotics, as I was still spluttering and wheezing, which I would go on to do for another 10 months even after treatment. And I returned home and waited with naive anticipation to see Dr. Schwingerschwanger. And my neck is still uncomfortable at times, to this day, by the way. That's a fact. I thought it kind of strange that Billy wanted to see me at the hospital, but I figured that maybe he was new and that this was where he operated from. So he came out to show me into a room, barely looked at my neck, the lump now being barely 2 centimeters inside. He pulls out a biopsy needle right away. Every cell and fiber in my being began to literally shake with apprehension and fear because I was only prepared for a consultation that day, not an operation. But of course, ladies and gentlemen, everyone knows that operations pay way more than consultations. So he obviously had no regard for either protocol or my well-being. And having already been through what I'd been through, I wrongly presumed that this fraud knew what he was doing. So I consented. And I must remind you here that at no time did he ever go over any let's just watch, wait and see, as this thing would appear to be healing on its own scenario. Nor would he tell me that even a simple needle biopsy could cause paralysis in my left arm, which I suffer from now anyway, due to the stroke, if he hit the wrong nerve by mistake. Something he would tell me in his office 2 weeks later, after he'd missed the node not once but twice that first day. So without even looking, a local anesthetic, this man begins to invade my neck. And I'm a musician, remember? So had he even hinted that paralysis could result, I would have said, back off, punk. It's of course painful, but he takes out a sample and gives it to his nurse and puts it in some solution in a container. She puts it aside and says that he hadn't obtained enough cell. So he approaches me and tells me this and says that he must go in again. And I again foolishly accede to this man's wishes. Next, he attempts to use the same dirty needle that he missed with the first time. And again, the nurse advises him to change his equipment, something he denies along with going over the watch and wait scenario, along with the potential damage that could result. Now, I think he changed needles, but I don't really know, as I was anxious and in pain and just staring at the ceiling in disbelief and apprehension. He goes in again without anesthetic. It hurts again, this time even more so because this time he's also ripped a vein, which bleeds out onto my shirt collar, and the sample is taken, and I'm told that this time they'd obtained enough cells. So I leave the hospital in pain, holding a bandage to my neck. Upon arriving home, I remove the bandage only to find a spidery vein bruise and what looks like a buildup of blood at the base of my neck, indicating a vein had indeed been hit. This spidery vein bruise took 2 months to go away, by the way. 1 week later, I go to see Dr. Schwingerschwanger, where I lay on him the metaphor about the PTSD flags flapping wildly in the wind between my ears, and he digs it and thinks it's funny, and then he says to me, well, the results are back, and at least you don't have cancer, Mose. To which I finally reply, that's great, Doc, but what about this new bulge in my neck? You see, as a result of Dr. Schwingerschwanger's tampering, he had murdered the node, and it was now back up to the size of a walnut. And Dr. Poo-Poo then tells me to take it up with Dr. Schwing-Schwang the following week. So I go to see Dr. Schwing-Schwang in his office, and the first thing out of his mouth is, sorry, Mr. Stevenson, but we didn't even get enough cells. We didn't get enough cells, and I will have to do another biopsy. So this is number 3 he wants to do on me. Now this is the key place where I lose it. I begin to freak out on him in front of everyone in his office that day. I did not use any profanity whatsoever, though I certainly felt inclined to do so. But I tore a strip off him and said things like, "I thought you knew what you were doing. What's the protocol on invading a lymph node that appears to be healing on its own? And do you expect me to let you use me as your guinea pig and go in yet again, sir, when you couldn't hit the broadside of a barn door?" He begins to notice that the relationship has fallen apart. Finally informs me that the paralysis could result in the wrong nerve being suffered, and offers to set me up with some clown colleague of his in Richmond Hill. And I stormed out in a disappointed, frantic medical malpractice-induced PTSD rage. I go home to phone Dr. Schwingerschwanger's office and frantically demand an appointment with Dr. Schwingerschwanger ASAP. At this point, I am not using profanity, only expressing my distress, the only way one can, who suffers what I suffer from. But I can tell that his front desk person is holding the phone away from her ear after my voice gets even louder when she tells me that I will have to wait a month to see him. So I've been through 2 biopsies that failed. They killed the lymph node. I've had pneumonia, turned away from the hospital, not welcomed in and treated with any kind of respect at all. And now I have to wait a month to see him. She then puts me back to her ear and I question her on this, saying, "You had the phone moved away from your ear, didn't you?" To which she replies, "Yes," as I seem to be losing control. And I said, "Lady, you've just played the oldest trick a woman can play on a man in distress. So," and I slammed the phone down in her ear. Bling, bling. Now things begin to get very convoluted here, as I will explain. You see, I write up a letter of explanation to Dr. Schwingerschwanger, hinting at my apology, though I felt wronged here, and didn't really feel sorry for what I had done under those horrendous circumstances, as I am now in fear of losing him as my physician. Because you see, up until the lymph node affair, we'd had a productive arrangement, and I found him to be quite thorough in every way. In fact, when I had no doctor as a result of the hepatitis C fiasco, my psychiatrist, Dr. Schwanger, begged him to take me on as his patient, which he did, and which I shall be eternally grateful for. I then hand-delivered the letter to Dr. Schwingerschwanger in his office personally. He then goes to Dr. Buckerson, my cognitive behavioral therapist, and asked him to report back to him word for word what I say to him, which in my opinion is a complete betrayal of the doctor-patient relationship. I mean, Paul Bernardo's lawyer didn't even tell them where the tapes were in the light fixture up above in the hallway. And now this behavioral therapist is going to tell my doctor word for word what I say to him. So I say, he asked me, "So what will you do if Dr. Schwingerschwanger abandons you, Mose?" And I say that I will simply add him to the list with Doctors Schwang and Schwang. Of course, for abandoning me in my time of need and for stoking my PTSD by mishandling my situation on every level. Dr. Malanga then rats on me to Dr. Schwanger, and Dr. Schwanger does indeed, and unfortunately decides to abandon me. You gotta have a little fun, right? Anyway, it's not fun. I'm simply, I'll never play guitar again, but I am currently writing a book with all my poetry and prose. And the first line in the book is, "Poetry is the sound that a soul makes when it cracks and crumbles beneath the weight of a horrifying, intolerable magnificence." So for a while there, after the stroke and after the fiasco with the lymph node, I actually felt like if the world was flat, I felt like stepping off the edge of it and flying off into space, interstellar space. But I've rediscovered myself in my writing again. And when I've done this probably one and only book that I'll ever do, which will be entitled From the Other Side of Goodbye, by the way, which is actually just another way of metaphorically saying hello. I plan to return to drawing again because my right arm still works. And I thank God for these things that, well, some people say they're a blessing. Personally, I think it's hard work. I certainly wasn't born with these particular talents, but I've worked at them. And that's how you get good at doing anything in this life. So, where am I? Okay, so here I am 17 years after the hepatitis C caper, and once again I'm without a physician in my time of need. Something I should take the time to remind the college that it is in your mandate to provide one to patients in such desperate situations such as I was, but this was never once even suggested in either situation. Can you imagine how it felt to be without a doctor 17 years ago and with a disease that is threatening my very existence, all because a couple of so-called professionals failed to inform me of what I had a right to know? Now here I am yet again, not knowing whether this is cancer or not, and being mocked and humiliated for having a condition that is not my fault, and which I have no control over. I'm talking about the PTSD, or should I say the PT-frickin-SD. It is indeed a cruel fallacy that the medical pretension is even aware of mental health issues, let alone pretends to be open to them. Dr. Schwang wanted me to go on medical marijuana, for God's sake. And I'm a recovering alcoholic drug addict. What a ridiculous thing to even suggest, which made me question his knowledge of my affliction as well. People with PTSD will over-medicate with anything they can get their hands on. So if you have a condition like mine and you're down to a few low-dose clonazepams for sleep at night, believe me, folks, you're doing well. And I should know because I've smoked enough fields of that stuff that I could have bought four plantations, traveled all over the world twice, bought a fleet of Cadillacs, and a Learjet with the money I've wasted on that shit. Next, a letter of referral arrives, courtesy of Dr. Schwalangalana, and recommending that I see Dr. Schwinga, an ENT specialist in Richmond Hill. But I figure if if Schwunga is recommending him, then he's probably only going to be more bad news. So I cancel. You can leave that in. I don't give a fuck. Let him try to sue me. And by now, I'm going to Huronia Urgent Care Clinic for my medical needs. And they send me to see Dr. Quadruple, who claims that a lymph node extraction is routine, a piece of cake, a standard procedure. But how could this be when Dr. Schwinga said himself that even a biopsy, given the area that it was in, see, that's where all the nerves connect to your head and your brain and your back, and your jugular vein is in there too. So it's a pretty tricky area to be sticking needles into. And now this guy's telling me it's a piece of cake, standard procedure. And Dr. Schwinga said himself that even a biopsy given the area it was in could result in serious complications, including permanent paralysis. Am I supposed to trust this guy, who also wants to send me back to see a colleague who works out of the same office as Dr. Schwinga? Send me back to those vipers? I think not. So I go for blood tests at the clinic to see if they will indicate cancer. And then another ultrasound for the same reason. And finally an x-ray. The result of all these things are then forwarded back to Dr. Quadruple, who simply leaves me hanging with no comment whatsoever, showing his complete lack of understanding or respect for PTSD, and fueling my rage again to the point where I try in vain to include him in my suit. He also, like the others, refuses to reveal to me just what the ENT protocol is regarding the invasion of a lymph node that is obviously healing on its own. In order to defend and protect his fellow colleagues, I am left to conclude, something the college also neglected to do, by the way, in their so-called investigation. Finally, I asked the clinic to set me up with an ENT special in Toronto or Newmarket. But the only name they can come up with is Dr. Schwengerswang, his former colleague, Bungadin, in Richmond Hill. So I basically say, screw it, and consent to a further violation of my body in a desperate attempt to find some kind of resolution to this out-of-control dilemma. My brother drives me down to see him, and he seems to be a nice, knowledgeable fellow, but then don't they all? And an appointment is made for my third biopsy to be performed at Richmond Hill Hospital. Now, I presumed wrongly yet again that Dr. Palunga would be performing it, and that it would be done on a screen where I could watch the entire procedure. At least this is what I had been told and was prepared for. But when I arrived, Dr. Schwenga was nowhere to be found, and I was led to see a Dr. Spalangalinga. And the first thing he says to me is, "So where is it?" Now, given that you know so far, given what you know so far from what I've tried to tell you here, you'd think that you would, excuse me, I'm lost. My eyes. I don't see very well after my stroke, by the way. I need to get new glasses. Now, given what you know so far, how do you think that completely out of the blue comment went over with me? I was shocked. I thought, is this some kind of cruel and malicious joke? Don't these morons even talk to one another? He's asking me, where is it? Why, even a rough carpenter would know better. So I pointed to the exact location, and an anesthetic was administered this time, and I was told to face away from him. There was certainly no screen available to watch this procedure, as I was promised, and he goes in not once but 3 times. And when it is over, I notice, like in that photograph I included in the previous correspondence, that his entry point, see the lymph node was up here, infected was here, was at least 2 inches below the murdered node. So he goes in down here into an area of my neck that is supposed to be pretty dangerous to reach a node up here. You know, it's absolutely absurd. I mean, if you're building a fence and you put the fence line on someone else's property, you don't get paid until you dig up every one of those cement-filled holes and you put it over on the property it's supposed to go on. These guys all got paid for everything they did. And no one all through any of this has even bothered to tell me that none of this was necessary and that you can live with a dead node, which I'm living with. And it's really, I don't know if it's dead or not or whether it healed on its own, but the swelling has gone down. But it took over a year. And then I had a stroke a year later. Once again, during this whole investigation. Once again, because operations pay more than consultations. And my human meat and needs are irrelevant to their inhuman greed. That's the conclusion I've come up with. Now you can bet your bottom dollar, just like you people here today, every one of these charlatans and manipulators of the systems got paid, even though they did not do their jobs properly. Here I go again, repeating myself. You see, I used to build fences and decks for a living, ladies and gentlemen. And if you set your post over on someone else's property lines, those posts would have to come out and be reset before you would collect on services rendered. But not so with the plutocracy that feeds at these kinds of corporate welfare troughs. Everybody gets paid all the time. Notice not one of my killers even had to show up today. This is preposterous in my opinion. Notice how not one of this is preposterous in my opinion, and for the lack of a better word, unacceptable. I hate using politically correct terms like that, by the way. I loathe terms like that. Terms like unacceptable, in a better world, in a perfect world, is the glass half full, half empty. Those are all gutless, cowardly slogans that well bought and paid for I got minors use when you tell them about your problems that they don't give a shit about. Dr. Schwing's excuse was that I had asked for the biopsy, kind of like when they said regarding my hep C, but you gave this to yourself, didn't you? But if you will read The Gift of Death by Andrew Picard about Canada's tainted blood tragedy, you will find that hepatitis C came back with the troops who'd served in the Second World War and was in our blood supply ever since, and long before it became an issue in the shady 80s with tainted blood. But that is not the issue here, because I could ask him to cut my penis off and turn me into a woman, but this would never happen in a million years without many consultations and much preparation, and I am in no position to judge whether a biopsy is warranted or not, as I am not a doctor. By the way, a little comic aside here, what's the difference between God and a doctor?
What's that?
Eh?
What's that?
What's the difference between God and a doctor?
Dunno.
God does not possess the audacity to presume that he's a doctor. Okay. Just a little comic relief if there hasn't been enough already. Okay, so where was I? Okay. Oh, yeah. But this is not the issue here. Okay, yeah, okay. I simply asked if it might be helpful. That is all. And from that point on, I should have simply had a well-informed consultation, certainly not an operation, and especially as it was healing on its own, as Dr. Boo-Boo, his inexperienced co-professional, though well-meaning, I'm sure, did not take either my node situation or my PTSD seriously enough, which only helped to fuel my panic. This entire episode, however, could and should have been dealt with courteously and professionally by Dr. Schwing. When I seriously began to have my doubts about my doctor's office's credibility, and the alarm bells were ringing uncontrollably in my mind, with deja vu thoughts of, oh no, I don't like this, and I've been here before. Will someone please just step up to the proverbial plate and just help me? This did not happen with every doctor I have subjected myself to, ladies and gentlemen. And I severely doubt the ability and or the resolve of those assembled here today. And so in an attempt to try to sum things up, about time, eh? What have I explained so far? 1, that I went through a similar ordeal 17 years ago and had the college investigated, my personal physician and the one who worked for the Salvation Army, that they both knew, and failed in their professional duty to inform me, which resulted in my near demise no less than 4 times. 2, I was referred to Dr. Blinga Blinga at Toronto General and was put on a low grade of interferon that everybody knew wouldn't clear the virus, even though Revitron, the forerunner of Pegatron, which was clearing the virus at the time, was available. And halfway through that treatment, the bottle cap colors on the medicine I was subcutaneously injecting myself with changed, leading me to conclude that this must be those placebos I was promised. However, after week number 2 of treatment that month, I became gravely ill and almost died once again, leading me to suspect that because I had so many letters of support and was determined to take my case all the way, that I might have been considered expendable by the dark powers that rule over our lives in secret and from behind closed doors that no one is allowed to enter, but them. 3, I was forced to give up my case because there was not even, nor is there now, any remedy available in our system that a citizen can tap into in order to try to get to the bottom of any criminal activities that might have been committed by that privileged class of so-called professionals who are obviously above the law. Unless you've got the money, honey. This entire smoke and mirror game of torture and deceit left me with a severe case of medical malpractice-induced post-traumatic shock, that's what they used to call it, which resulted in driving me to try with every ounce of energy and wit that I possessed to try to right the wrongs that have been done to my person, and finally succeeding in life and proving all my persecutors wrong in the final analysis. 5, so I took to peddling my musical other end on the street for spare change, and I sang every song I ever played from the center of my heart and soul, guts and being, and total strangers saw this and rewarded me well for putting some spark back into the street scene and by daring to open up my chest and show the whole God-forsaken world the interior of things everyone feels, but might be afraid to or have no reason to show them to their friends or this world. 6. I took it pretty far, ladies and gentlemen, pretty far indeed, but such a loser and a ne'er-do-well. For such a loser and a ne'er-do-well. 6. I began to get gigs again. I got my CDs accepted by the CBC. Big deal. I opened for some mighty big names in my spare time, of which I had none. I was also a gardener too. I managed to secure a diploma in addictions. And 7. Even though I accomplished what I did and against such odds, I never got signed to that label, nor was I able to secure permanent work in the addictions fields, though I've volunteered on the side for our street center here, and I'm still on the list, by the way. But due to my current condition and being psychically consumed by this case, I have not returned yet to my former position. And because near the end of my musical career, the medical profession screwed me over once again by botching 3 biopsies, by turning me away from emerge with full-blown pneumonia, and by abandoning me yet again in my most dire time of need, not to mention the cellophane see-through lies and deceit that every doctor involved, along with the college, put me through, when I madly attempted to try in vain to just stand up for myself one more time and against the system that I already knew, and so do each and every one of you here today, had no heart to begin with. You see, I had a very severe stroke last March. So we're in January 2015. I had my stroke in March of 2014. And which will no doubt prohibit me from doing again the one thing I love the most, and that saw me through times not one of you assembled here today could even face, let alone live through. Now, I can't prove whether or not it was the stress that caused by the malpractice perpetrated on me or the trans fats in my margarine, but I personally believe that it was the re-inflammation of my anxiety that did it in the end. You see, people understand schizophrenia, autism, and most forms of obvious mental health conditions, but PTSD is the most misunderstood mental health issue out there. Why? Because we can present as normally as someone without issues until we get triggered. And then because if it's anybody's guess what we'll do, we frighten people with the extremities of our emotions. And we get pegged, slotted, judged, and deemed as simply being, again, for lack of a better word, inappropriate. You see, my executioners, I am a poet, and therefore absolutely loathe what political I'm repeating myself again, loathe what political correctness has done to our language, and in terms and phrases like inappropriate, unacceptable, imperfect, perfect will drive me up the proverbial wall and out of my metaphorical skull. I tried, we're at the last page, thank God. I tried in vain to obtain an advocate to see me through all of this, but of course I was deemed too capable of representing myself and therefore unworthy. I did not appeal the college's decision on the case I tried to launch against the extremely indifferent and unavailable Dr. Quadruple, nor did I try to launch cases against Dr. Schwing, Dr. Schwang, or Dr. Bling, because I already knew in my heart of hearts and my poet's soul that it would be fruitless to do so, and even now, no doubt, I am probably being seen as nothing more than a bothersome, tedious, and vexatious litigant. But at least you guys all got out of the big city for the day, eh? And you got to see the sights up here in Mississauga North, Rumorville, Old Barrytown, city by the bay, and town without even a shred of pity. And I did not even attempt to try to secure the services of a lawyer, because I already knew what their positions would be regarding my case. So why are we even here then? you may have already asked yourselves. We're here, people, because I'm entitled as a citizen in this trough-nuzzling, cradle to the grave, bought and paid for colonial backwater to take this thing, no matter how futile and pointless it might appear to everyone involved, as far as your mandate will allow me to. And if you will suffer me, my intention to try to enlighten you, life is not always about having fun or making money. It's actually about doing the right thing. Believe it or not. And in an age when we've been deliberately dumbed down right across the board by the mainstream media in order to manufacture consent for their premeditated war on terror. Dog haters. With deliberately connived musical sap and pap on our airways and nothing but Hoarders, Storage Wars, Survivor, American Idol, Canadian Idol, So That You Think You Can Dance, Dancing with the Stars, Dr. Drew, Dr. Oz, Dr. Phil, Maury Povich, Oprah Winfrey, Jerry Springer, and the so-called History Channel with nothing but Ice Road Truckers, Spawn Stars, and MASH on it every goddamn day, Ghost Stories, The Abominable Snow People of Nebraska, 5 Gays, 1 Girl, Married, Marilyn Dennis, Steve and Chris. Which one's Stephen, which one's Chris? We may never know. Cougars, Mistresses, Sex and the City, and good old Nancy Grace, to name but a few. The very word justice is just a 6-letter word, and true democracy only exists in the philosophical works of writers no one in this cultural cesspool will even bother to teach anymore, let alone read. Obviously, I'm angry, ladies and gentlemen, but I assure you that I'm not the only one who'd like to see us become a republic, rip the Queen's face off all our money and start printing it ourselves for a change, give the finger to NATO and get out of this phony, filthy, stinking ship of empire. But how could this be achieved when voting machines can be manipulated to flip the vote, when corporations have achieved personhood, and when it has been determined that it is not considered unlawful for a news organization to knowingly falsify the news? See Joel Buchanan's very informative documentary, The Corporation. And you may begin to actually get just what I'm getting at. You see, in my Canada, my touchy-feely, comfy-wumpy, bought and paid for little friends, Parliament, not our judiciary, should craft our laws. And whenever a citizen of this teddy bear puppet for the New World Order is wronged or defiled by a paid employee of the state, the merit of their cases would be judged in my Canada by a panel of butchers, bakers, candlestick makers, waitresses, house cleaners, janitors, plumbers, carpenters, ditch diggers, street musicians, and Air Canada flight attendants. And the law would be written in a language any 5-year-old could understand. And if a wrong against that person could be proved beyond a reasonable doubt by those panels and juries, then damages would be awarded accordingly, and blame would be placed upon the individual that did the damage, and they would have to suffer the consequences, whether they be dismissal or jail time, like the rest of us. But then in my Canada, you'd be all out of work, wouldn't you? And the neighborhoods you'd be forced to live in wouldn't be near as upscale as I'm sure they are now would they? And we'd all be having this hearing in a union hall somewhere that smelled of sweat and toil and tears, not some upper-class, affordable to the poor hotel like this one. And we'd be running everything off of wind and solar. People would start reading again. Real art and music would become relevant again. Dummies would think twice before they dropped their Tim Hortons cups on some beautiful beach in Georgian Bay. Everyone would have meaningful work. Pornography would finally be seen as unhealthy as smoking, and true love would never die. Thank you, my friends, and I'm sorry if my story has bored you in any way. Truly, Mo Stevenson. So, I realized that was probably hard to sit through. There's a lot to digest. Basically, I'm saying once again, I will reiterate that until we live in a democracy that has panels of the common people to overlook malpractice issues, whether they be done by the police, doctors, dentists, teachers, or any other paid employees of the state, to judge the merits of that case, award damages, and assign blame where it belongs, democracy doesn't exist. It's only a 9-letter word like oligarchy, and you can buy it if you got the do-re-mi. If you don't have the do-re-mi, then you're shit out of luck. And you'll have to go through the bullshit that I've gone through. So, if you'd like to contact me and start a movement, I don't know what we'll call it, let's say the Direct Democracy Movement, you can email me at hamletvango, that's HAMLETVANGOGH at gmail.com, or phone me at 705-726-4132. My name's Mo Stevenson, and it's high time we put these bottom feeders where they deserve to be, and that every person in this country be elevated to the same status, and that even a janitor can run for prime minister. No more, I think the last 10 of our prime ministers have all worked for Power Corps, I believe. So you tell me.
Oh, again?
You remember in the beginning of my speech, I said what they would say at the end? I would get a letter from them. Here it is in black and white. You can see there. It is the decision of the Health Professions Appeal and Review Board to confirm the decision of the Inquiries, Complaints, and Reports Committee of the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario and take no further action. And what I'm really basically trying to say by doing this is that the College of Physicians is therefore irrelevant to anything but perhaps collecting information. But then there should be a process put in place after that information is collected that the person can go to and be judged by a jury of their peers to determine what happened. And it's like the police judging the police. Doctors shouldn't be judging doctors. And protocols should be revealed so that rights and wrongs can be weighed and measured and judged accordingly. That is true democracy. This facade, a show, a charade, and basically a type of mental torture and brutality that knows no bounds and has no soul and would sell its own grandmother for a buck.
Laden weight my branch to bear, my sails are bent with what hangs there. Your smile, your touch, your countenance, they make the blood in my veins dance. As if our paths had crossed before, our footprints press some distant shore, where we once hovered hand in hand and fell as one on distant sands. And those circumstances upon us are, and come what may, enshrouds our star. Let tongues that would wag what they might, but darling, if I was midnight, then surely you were late, then surely you were late. If I was midnight, I knew you as I knew my own, as if those bones were carved in stone. As white and timeless as the sea, it filled the deepest part of me. Ah, but the straw-filled lawful jaws of fate impede my way outside your gate. What dice or day could raise this net? Forget me not with wet regret. And those circumstances upon us are, and come what may, enshrouds our star. Let tongues that would wag what they might, but darling, if I was midnight, then surely you were late, then surely you were late. If I was midnight, you turned your mate to the wind and rain, and like the wind and rain, unexplained you remain. Some things were never meant to be. Could one of them be you and me? When time and change have taken their place, and life's hurricanes have realigned your face. When friends fall out and feelings die, remember me and softly sigh. And those circumstances upon us are, and come what may, enshrouds our star. Let tongues that would wag what they might, but darling, if I was midnight, then surely you were late, then surely you were late. If I was midnight, then surely you were late, then surely you were late. If I was midnight.